Maybe I'll just begin by saying what we mean by healthy cognitive aging. And I guess a good way of thinking about it is living the best life one can with cognitive change. So, for example, if somebody ends up with a dementia, making sure that the life that they're living is as good as it can be. And we're interested in how the design of homes can have an effect on that. It's quite a large research project. I'll try not to get too technical and focus on the interesting bits. So if you go to the next slide, Chantel, you can see some of the partners who have been involved right from the beginning. And as we go on, we're recruiting more and more partners. It seems to be an idea that's hit the right time and something that people are really interested in. So you'll see our partners are from all areas of housing, public housing, private builders, designers. We've got some international partners and so on. And interestingly, we've got a gaming company who are supporting us, and I'll mention a little bit more about that shortly. So going on to the next slide. We're aiming to crack some quite knotty problems that have been around for a long time in terms of designing housing for people as they age. We're interested in identifying innovations that will support people to live well with cognitive change, live, as I've said, the best life they can. And it's very important to us that these innovations and designs are what suits people as they age, in the sense of what they want as well as what they need. We want these designs to be, as I've said here, practical and affordable, which is a sine qua non really, but more importantly, scalable. So things that can be delivered at a larger scale by developers and providers. And importantly, we need the designs to be suitable both for newly built and also for existing homes. So I may use the word retrofitting from time to time. And that's about looking at homes that people are already in and seeing how they can be modified to provide better support. So what we're doing is designing and testing homes in collaboration with a whole range of stakeholders, importantly including older people themselves. In the end, we'll produce guidance for making decisions about homes. That's a very big umbrella term for older people deciding what to do, professionals deciding how to advise people, housing providers deciding what to do with their stock, builders, etc. So our ambitions are not small, I would say. We're really pleased that we've got lots of partners involved, because clearly it's not something that academics can do by themselves. It's a particular kind of research that is very applied and therefore has to be done in partnership, otherwise it doesn't achieve its objects. So going to the next slide. Thank you. As a large project, we're able to come at the problem from a number of different directions. So we've spent quite a lot of time looking at the literature, what evidence already exists. We've done some analysis of large-scale data, and I'll explain the acronyms in a moment, particularly in relation to cognitive change and quality of life. And we're also doing an exercise which we're calling home mapping. And this is really to help us understand older people's own perspectives. We're including people who have cognitive impairment, also people who don't have it or don't have it to any marked extent. And we're wanting to understand how people live in their homes, what they like and dislike about them, and what they would like to change or what they would be willing to change. In addition to that, which I won't talk about, we're doing some electronic monitoring. We're doing some co-design. We're having a lot of fun using VR, which is enabling us to work through several iterations of designs, both new and for retrofitting. And we're developing in the end what we're calling some legacy tools, one of which is a serious game. So what that means is using gaming technology to support decision making, and that's why we have a gaming company as a partner. So the next slide, please. I'll go on to talk a little bit about what we're finding. So if we're looking at what's already known, we're particularly interested in research which has evaluated innovations. There's lots of descriptions of innovations which are very interesting and exciting and, you know, get people going, but they don't provide us with evidence about what works. I've just seen George's question. I'll come back to it, can I, at the end? So what we find if we look at this evaluation literature is that there's a tendency to focus on rather small bits of it rather than the whole picture of home design. We're trying to take, in contrast, a much more holistic perspective. We find that researchers haven't looked at costs or business aspects to any great extent, which is really surprising when you think this is something that could be potentially quite costly, but which could have big effects. There's a tendency to think of older people as homogenous, which really winds me up, I can tell you. You know, older people, the World Health Organization says older age people start at 50, people that can live to over 100. There's no way that people who've lived 50 years different from each other are all the same. So forgive me a small rant on that one. We find a lot of examples of small scale innovations, very little attention being paid to scalability. And generally, researchers define the outcomes themselves, the outcomes being the measures that tell you if something is working well or not working well. They don't define them in the holistic way that we want to. They don't take on board older people's own perspectives, and they miss the kind of complex interplay of positive and negative effects. Environmental changes aren't all good necessarily. They aren't all bad necessarily. There are lots of trade-offs, as I'll illustrate shortly. We do find some promising practice, and this cheers me up, having been wound up first. Earlier intervention is clearly important. This is something that needs to be thought about across the lifespan, not just when people get old and get dementia, for example. People really need good information at the right time, and they need the information reinforced, which it really heartens me to hear that you're having more of an information service and providing people easy access to adaptations. Consultation with older people is helpful. More of a focus on how older people engage with their home environments, an understanding of the individual context and circumstances, and also an alertness to unintended consequences. This is about the trade-offs that I mentioned a moment ago. So the next slide, please. This is quite a technical slide for people who like things like that, so I won't go into massive detail on it. Just to say that ELSA is the English Longitudinal Study of Aging, and this is a very large survey that surveys people 50 plus over time, and it produces huge amounts of data about different aspects of aging. What we're interested in from it is home adaptations, cognitive change and well-being, and how those interact with each other. And my colleagues Lisa and Alistair have been doing this work. So I'll just briefly outline some of the results of that. If you can move on, Chantel. Thank you. So we find that the most common things that people do to their homes, and this is about retrofitting, are in the bathroom, and it's most commonly putting in a shower or a wet room. Brits, of course, are very attached to their bathtubs, and actually our international colleagues find that very amusing that houses don't, as a rule, have showers in them. But anyway, so there's a big focus on that. Other kinds of adaptations, which are described in the bullet point, are less common. We find that people with cognitive impairment are more likely to have adaptations. We also find that if you're well off, you've paid for your housing, and you're not too old or physically impaired, your well-being scores are higher. Then going on to the next slide. Thank you. So as I've said, more people with cognitive impairment do adaptations than people without. Despite that, we find that living with cognitive impairment continues to be associated with lower quality of life scores. And although the adaptations are certainly helping people, they may be just reducing the decline in well-being scores, let's say. And going through a lot of statistical manipulation, which is very complex and we'd be here till Christmas, I think, we come to the conclusion that people living with cognitive impairment may not be getting the kinds of adaptations that they need to promote improved quality of life. So the question clearly emerges then, what do people actually want and what do people actually need? So to start exploring that, next slide, I'll move on to the home mapping, which at the moment I would say is some of the most exciting work that we're doing. We're getting 50 older people to make maps of their homes and talk to us about how they use their space, what they like, what they dislike. We're giving them lots of options about how they want to do that. Some people want to do photos, some people want to draw, some people want to use little templates that we've produced for them. And I'll talk more about the results of that. We're also just about to start having a larger sample of people using our design tool. And what they'll do is review their home and think about what changes they might make, what might be possible, what they might prefer. So the next slide, I've got some examples of some of the maps. And as you'll see, they're very different. So the person on the left wanted to draw and wanted to show where all the walls were and labeled the house like an estate agent, you know, bed 1, bed 2. Whereas the person on the right was more focused on what was happening in the rooms. So you see they've given quite a lot of space to pet budgies and watching TV and cooking in the kitchen, things like that. So these are very varied, and I show them to you to emphasize we're trying to get at where people come from themselves. We're not trying to impose any kind of perspective or priorities on them. So moving on, we can look at some of the results that are coming out from the preliminary analysis. We've nearly finished the field work, and we're doing the analysis as we go along. So we're calling these emerging insights, and these are from my colleague Melanie and their research fellow team, who are 4 people. We find that people think about their home differently. Some of the literature would suggest to you that everybody loves their homes and wants to stay there. For some people, that's true. It's a place of central importance. It's fundamental to people's identity and ways of being. For other people, it's just a house, and any other house will do fine, they say. Again, echoing what we've just heard about your service, we find that there's a real lack of timely provision of suitable adaptations. They're coming late. We find that people have great difficulty in identifying how to get adaptations and how to negotiate the system. And there are a lot of people doing private adaptations. Now, that may be because they've got the money and they can afford it, but we think that they're not getting the information they need to do the right things. That's a bit of a problem. Or it may be that they're absolutely desperate and they just end up doing themselves and getting themselves into financial difficulty. All of this has been made worse by the pandemic. So we've got a whole population of people out there who have spent more time than usual living in houses unsuited to their needs, which is awful. I think it's an unexplored aspect of the pandemic. And you know, time marches on. People have needs and they need to be satisfied. They can't wait 3 years, because in 3 years their needs will be different. So moving on. I've got some more of these. So one of the things that the literature doesn't really think about is outside space, the garden. And we would already be arguing that if you're thinking about future housing, then you have to think about future outside space as well, and supporting people to age in place. And we're describing people's relationships with their garden as kind of love-hate. So there's one dimension of it which says, I love to sit out in the evening, the sun comes round, you know, I'll sit with my G&T or my cup of tea, depending on my inclination. And it's really important. It's clearly important to quality of life. The hate part is people's worries about maintaining the garden, keeping things going, worrying about it becoming a mess, not being able to deal with the lawn and stuff like that. We find that people quite often make little changes to their houses, which then start to grow. So one thing that people use a lot, interestingly, is the post-it note. I often wonder at work how we managed without post-it notes, but people are using them to remind themselves of things, you know, on the front door just before you go out, have you got the keys? That kind of thing. Little reminders about where things are, little prompts about the time to do things and so on. As time goes on, the home can kind of shift from being a home space into a care space. As people will know, as small changes accumulate, but eventually make a big difference. And one of the things that does make a big difference here is equipment, as equipment comes in. I don't know if this happens in England, but one of the things we find is that people will go into hospital and they'll be sent home with a walking frame. And then they go into hospital again and they get sent home with another walking frame. And it's actually quite difficult to get rid of this stuff as time goes on. People are devoting whole areas of their house to storing care equipment that is probably obsolete. So that's something to think about. So as time goes on then, stuff, clutter and storage change. And people have different orientations to these. Some people are very attached to their things. You know, this is my stuff. As I sit here, I look around, I see my life, I see my children, my grandchildren, the things that came from my mother, the things that are really important to me. And that matters a lot to some people, but other people will say, actually, I've got way too much stuff. I don't need it. I never look at it. I've only got it because I haven't thrown it away. So I'm going to have a big clear out and just sort my life out. All of that is an example of the kind of trade-off and nuance that I indicated a moment ago. People are making choices about adaptations, which sometimes can have quite negative effects. Just a couple of examples. One is that the issue of new windows. Scotland's quite cold. I know England is as well. Cold. We've got a lot of cold and drafty and damp housing, which would benefit a lot from new windows. But you'll see people saying, well, I don't care about a 30-year guarantee on my new windows. I'm not going to be here in 30 years' time. I'll stick a bit of polythene over the window or put up some newspaper or something like that. They would clearly benefit, and so would the house actually, from new windows, but they'll trade off, they'll make a choice. They're not getting a lot of help with doing that kind of thing. This phrase handicap handles is a phrase used by actually more than one of our respondents, and it refers to the kind of handles that people get beside their front door to help them get up the step. White plastic, very obvious. People will say, I don't want those. It advertises that there's an older, weaker person living here. You know, it's a badge for burglars, let's say. So I'm not going to have them. I'm going to manage. So they're hanging on to, I don't know, the climbing plant by the house to pull themselves into the door. Not good, but clearly a bit of an issue for everybody concerned. The steep ramp I've highlighted here refers to an example of some people who did get proper occupational therapy advice about building a ramp, but decided it was too big. So instead of having a gentle ramp of the right incline, they built a much steeper one and said, oh, she's fine. She can get down that in her wheelchair, no problem. And this kind of thing is quite frightening, actually. This is not good advice, not good access to support, not good decisions, and really illustrates some of the needs that there are in this area. So the last bit of findings I would talk about is just about aging in the right place. So we talk a lot about that now. We used to say, let's have people aging in place. Now we're saying, let's have people aging in the right place. But I think we have to understand that that's quite a complex notion, and it may be not what people had wanted in their lives. A particular example of this is the example of people who came from migrant backgrounds who thought, I'd like to go back and age in the country of my parents, say. As time goes on, they find they can't afford it. The health system isn't very good in those countries, or they're not eligible for healthcare in those countries. So people are making choices and compromises all the time with issues like that, as they are with the issues of adaptations and home design. So I'll come now to my last slide, which is a bit of conclusion so far. So what we're finding is confirming that home design can make a difference in all directions, and it can make a difference one way or the other. And hopefully when we produce our designs, it'll make positive differences. It's not necessarily easy to achieve, and this is partly around access to advice, access to services, financial considerations of the kind of house that somebody's already living in. Our research is needed. The kinds of insights that we're getting are different from the existing research. It seems that older people are not getting what they need. Their own perspectives have been neglected, but if you look at them, they're varied and they are quite nuanced. The trade-offs come in there. So what we're doing next is we're taking all this data into making designs for new homes and for retrofitted homes for healthy cognitive aging. We've got our designs now in a second iteration. They'll be in a third quite shortly. And after the third one, we're going to do some much wider testing. And we're going to be using the gaming to help with the testing. So we're using VR at the moment, which is has to be one-to-one. It's quite complicated and labour intensive. So we'll have the game set up so that it reflects a lot of the trade-offs and choices that our evidence suggests people are having to make. And it'll also include cost as well. So for example, if I'm somebody getting older and I want to think about what I might do to my house to make it more cognitively friendly for me as I age, the game will help me think that through. So the game will say, right, you'd like a big bathroom. Okay, big bathroom. You've used up X of the budget that is available. And then I go, maybe that's not so important. Maybe I'll just go for the shower and I'll have an extra bedroom so that I can have my grandchildren to stay, or if I need a live-in carer, there's somewhere for them to be. So it helps work out some of these decisions. And we also have a version for developers and providers as well, which will work in similar ways. And it's not just playing, it's informed research findings, and we will have a full, proper health economist's cost analysis in it, so we can see how things pan out. And it'll also go into looking at the community level. So that's where the scalability will come into play. So the understanding of costs and benefits for everyone is incredibly important. And actually, I think that's really the key to cracking scalability. So my last slide is just a thank you very much slide. And if people would like to take part, look at the designs, have a go, please contact me. I'll be more than happy to put you in touch with the team. So hopefully that was of interest. And I think we could probably take the slides down. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I have to say that my cat has jumped on my computer and I've lost all the pictures. I can't get them back. Nigel, can you take over?
Yes, certainly I can. It obviously needs some IT training, doesn't it?
As the cat.
The cat. I mean, yes. That was a really interesting, Alison. We've got some. I've got some questions, and George is first in with some questions.
Mm-hmm.
So George, and you can see the chat there. Has Alison enlarged about the gaming? Has that answered that first question for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that's really quite interesting. I never would have thought of using VR as a way of replicating that, so it's really interesting to know about.
Yeah,
we're finding the VR. We've got some architects on the team, and you know, architects, when they're doing a design, they always want to talk to the client and all this kind of thing. And what they've said is actually the feedback on the VR is much better than the feedback that they get when they show people drawings.
Mm.
So people can walk around the house with the VR. It's working really well.
Yeah.
Just
I guess
people may
it's
not know
more of a real life picture rather than sort of just seeing the plans from an architect. You don't necessarily see it properly, do you?
No.
Whereas actually the VR gives you a chance to actually proper look at it. But no, that's really interesting. I never would have thought of considering something like that.
Yeah. If people don't know, VR is virtual reality. And Alison, do people need to wear the goggles, those big goggles that you see, or can it be done with just a regular monitor?
We've got both. We've got both because we wanted to include people who perhaps don't feel comfortable with the VR. So if you do it with the goggles, it's fully immersive. We've also got a version that people can look at on a tablet, which doesn't work quite so well. What we're developing next is a projection, which we'll be able to do on a big screen. So that'll be used more in the last year of the project.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because I can imagine that people won't have the kit, so they'll need help to access the VR. Won't they?
Yeah, we provide kit. We run workshops and we provide kit. And there's also people who don't like it much, and I'm one of them. I find it really dizzyfying and weird. But you know, some people they absolutely love it. Yeah,
great.
George, at what point of a cognitive impairment would you be offering that service to somebody? Because obviously you wouldn't be doing it with somebody who's quite end stage dementia.
Not the VR.
Would you be doing it more
absolutely
early? Would it be more early onset or before it gets to that point?
We're trying to involve people with as much cognitive impairment as want to do it. Mm-hmm. So some of the people who've used it are, I think, more impaired than you would imagine. You know, people often don't give people with cognitive impairment much credit, whereas actually people can do pretty well. Not obviously what you call end stage, but people who are quite impaired, I would say. We're not measuring how impaired they are. We're just asking them a couple of general questions. All of them have to have capacity because clearly they have to have capacity to give informed consent to do it. So we're not going beyond people who don't have capacity.
Thank you. So George has also asked about, do people with cognitive impairment have problems if there are significant adaptions or equipment is put into the house about remembering what's happened or where things are?
They can do, yeah, and that's one of the really big challenges. That's one of the reasons why we'd be recommending that the adaptations happen much sooner, so that people can have a bit of familiarity with them, at least for a period. I mean, there does come a point where people really find every activity difficult. But if it's earlier, if the intervention comes earlier, then people are more accustomed to it.
Yeah, yeah.
And some of the adaptations and design features are not confusing. So, for example, if people have the right flooring, then that decreases issues about people not wanting to go into a certain room because they think there's a step, or they think there's a big hole or something like that.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay, I've got one question, and then I'm just going to give people and anybody else an opportunity to pop the hand up or come off mute for another question. You mentioned that mundane small adaptations can make quite a big difference.
Yeah.
And you obviously mentioned the post-its, which, you know,
Yes.
it may or may not be an adaptation,
Tiny.
but it is a coping mechanism. Can you give examples of other mundane or small adaptations that have been widely used?
Yes, one that we found effective. We do, as a university, we do service development as well for dementia services. And one of the things that we found really effective is if you have an all white bathroom, this, for a person with dementia, it's often very difficult to distinguish where the toilet is. If you change to a coloured toilet seat, it makes a difference. And I've heard my colleagues just talk about a carer absolutely at the end of their tether. You know, it's usually a partner is not able to use the toilet effectively, you know, endless mess, endless clearing up, no dignity. The person with dementia is really upset, and they change the toilet seat and that sorts it, at least for a period. And, you know, even if it sorts it for 6 months, that's 6 months that those people were able to stay together and be in the home they want to be in. And it's a little thing.
Yeah, that's really impressive. So you will be sort of publishing some of these insights and making them more widely available, will you?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
If people look at our website and they look at the Dementia Services Development Centre website, there's a lot of information about small adaptations on that. I'll add that to the slides.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'll add the DSDC link before I send them to Chantel, and people can look stuff up. We have a product accreditation service as well, so companies come to us and say, tell us which of our flooring is dementia friendly. Yeah, things like
Fantastic. That. Yeah, we maybe use that as we're refurbishing our bathroom floor in the ILC.
Oh, right, okay. No, we'd be very happy to talk to you about that. My colleagues would. They're architects, designers. They're very good. Yeah.
Any final questions? Yes, Amanda.
Yeah, can I ask a question? I have a couple of questions. So I work in Devon, so I'm an occupational therapist, but actually I manage a research team. So I'm sort of looking at it from both perspectives, actually. Yeah. But so I'm really interested to hear kind of about the environment and the use of colour and patterns. And I wondered if some of the companies that you're working with are kind of considering sustainability, because like you were saying, I find it so infuriating, the kind of use of equipment and then it not being reused and recycled, and the kind of landfill of frames and sticks. Is that a consideration? Will there be kind of thought around kind of recycled materials or sourcing products locally? I know that's a kind of much bigger issue, but
it is. But our designs will be sustainable designs. You know, they have to be. There's no way that we would want to produce an unsustainable design in the current circumstances, obviously. So we'll have that in. We are doing a bit of work around that issue of the landfill and the walking frames and the sticks. So we're going to look at some local authority websites and evaluate them with a group of older people to see which ones are navigable and which ones aren't. because there are some good ones and there are some absolutely awful ones. We've also got a little squad of OTs who've got really enthused by this and are working on, what did they call it? A recycling scheme for some of the, I forget what the term was, somebody said it earlier. Anyway, they're trying to get the equipment reused.
Yeah.
And there's been some issue with it because of having to decontaminate it because of the pandemic and all of this kind of stuff. It's, you know, it's not, you can't just take it in, send it back out again like a library book. You've got to do some work on it, obviously.
Yeah, I think that was why it stopped originally, because it was a cost issue of kind of picking it up and then, but
okay. All right.
Well, just ask one more quick question, quick simple question. So when you're doing the VR, are you doing that in the garden as well? Because you were saying about the importance of the garden.
So our house has a little outside space. We've got two designs we're working on at the moment. One story, one 2-story. Has a little outside sort of decking area with a lawn, so people can go outside and comment on it. And actually, they really like it. At the moment, they really like it, and they like. We've got long windows in both the living room and the kitchen, so you can go out from different rooms onto this little decking area, and it's very popular.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you.
Great. Some do need to draw the questions quick close, I'm afraid. But for those residual questions, Alison is providing her email address for the presentation, so I'm sure you'll be able to pick up on that. And so thank you so much for a fascinating talk. And we will for sure post the resources on our ILC website and make sure that we upgrade the advice that we're offering to people living with cognitive impairment and their carers. So thank you for a really stimulating presentation and encouraging us to think and do more. So thank you for that.